Okay, question number one from Brixmas11. What is the largest animal you could beat in hand-to-hand combat? I'm going to go straight off the bat and say that I have no theoretical or practical experience in this, so I'm not going to be hubristic and think that I could wrestle a bear or anything even close to that size, as most teenagers that picked up a weight for the first time on Reddit and Instagram threads seems to believe that they can do. No, bears beat humans pretty much every day of the week, although there was actually a pair of high school wrestlers in America I saw a while ago where one of them was being attacked by the bear and the friend came in and managed to defuse the situation, which is remarkable. So, not that, because I'm not a high school wrestler, but I think being accountable to myself, the fact I have no skill, no experience, and normally I would sort of just consider tagging Johnny into this situation, as he is a very competent hand-to-hand combat person. I'd just sort of exit stage left like Homer Simpson does into the bushes in that meme. But he is not here. He's not on this podcast. So I think anything around the size of a Rottweiler or smaller would be where I'd draw the line. I think anything bigger than that would probably then become too feral and too naturally aggressive for me to be able to tolerate. And I wouldn't have the skills to be able to apply any sort of rebuttal to that specific animal. You can tell by my very staccato speech here that this is not something I've particularly considered, but let's just say that I will avoid hand-to-hand combat with animals at all costs, so therefore, hopefully my ignorance here can remain exactly that, ignorance. Question number 2, what's a day of eating like at the moment? So for the past sort of 4 or 5 weeks, I've been eating about 500 calorie surplus just around the strongman prep that I've been doing for the Donald Dinney Games at the Gathering in Aberdeenshire on August the 6th. And that has been around sort of 3,500 calories a day, and is kind of been a little bit counterintuitive in some ways because I've been prepping for the 500-pound deadlift and sub 5 mile, 500-pound deadlift and mile sub 5 total, where I want to lean down as much as I can and reduce body fat as much as I can. But for the strongman stuff and just top end strength, I really want to really commit to that because some of the events at the Donald Dinney Games are heavy. And I'd like to give my best chance at turning up and being able to do them all as best I can. I'm not expecting to win podium at all, anything like that. I'm expecting to go up, and I'd love to be able to get a rep on the board or a meter on the board or whatever it might be for every event that's contained within it. So getting a lot of training done for the mile and the deadlift done in a surplus, which means a slightly more aggressive deficit once we've got this strongman effort out of the way, should probably balance things out. So same breakfast as always. Oats, whey, frozen berries, and then I'll have a sort of protein bar and a coffee in the morning. I'll have a big lunch, sandwiches, sort of meal prep meal, something like that. Afternoon will be probably another protein bar, protein shake, maybe some more oats, depending on what training's looking like. Evening meal will be very varied, whatever in the house. So could be steak, veg, potatoes, could be chicken, stir fry, could be pizza in the pizza oven, could be whatever. It's very varied, and that's actually what I enjoy. I tend to have around 1,200 calories left in the evening and just throw together what's kicking around the house, trying to get as much micronutrition in as I can then. But I've enjoyed being slightly higher calories for the past however many weeks it's been now. But I am really wanting to lean out and get a bit lighter at the moment to see that translate to the mile efforts, because the track work at the moment is very, very tough. And the low-hanging fruit gains that would come from being a bit lighter would make me quite buoyed in terms of coming out of the back end of those sessions when I feel very beaten up, seeing the progress that is waiting there for me just by being a bit lighter. So effectively, as soon as I hit August the 6th, pretty aggressive deficit where I'm going to hang on to as much of my deadlift strength as I can. I'm confident I'm good for about 250, 255 at the moment, so I've got a lot of strength to hold on to. But obviously, with a 500-pound deadlift and mile under 5 minutes, I would like that deadlift to move as smoothly, quickly, and effortlessly as possible going into a max effort mile. All ridiculous things to say out loud, but that's how things are looking. Question number 3 from Josh Shippers. Where does your mind go on long runs before a big lift or on the uphill cycles? They're all very, very different things, to use those 3 examples. So on long runs, I normally pre-prepare some thoughts. Sounds a bit silly, but almost thought groupings, thought categories, things to consider for my long runs, and then sort of go out trying to understand them, unpack them as I go. So whether it's a business decision that I've been making throughout the week, whether it's a financial breakdown, whether it's a how should I approach the rest of the year from this perspective, how am I reflecting on my social life, am I seeing my family enough, all these things, I take these sort of big questions or problems or discussion points in my own life out onto the long run and then unpack them as I go, because long runs are normally in zone 2, which means that I'm in a clear enough headspace to be able to really think. Big lift is very different. That's pure aggression, and I actually can't really tell you what I'm thinking about other than trying to focus on my mental cues as much as I can within the parameters of whatever heavy metal music is playing between my ears, whether I'm smelling salts or anything in between, and just making sure that I feel as confident and charged up as possible going into a heavy lift. And uphill cycles are probably the ones that I struggle with self-doubt on the most, because obviously my body weight uphill on the bike is sort of where physics wins every day of the week. But I just try and essentially go one pedal stroke at a time, be really confident in my gearing, and try and keep my cadence as high as possible, because if I feel the sort of gradient increase and my cadence drop, it's then difficult to have faith that you haven't just sort of fatigued a little bit. So it's push through the hard sections and sort of come out the other side confident that you'll be able to get through the next bit. Where that becomes even more tough is the self-doubt that comes in when it's a new hill and you don't know when it's going to end, you don't know if there's a false summit. But if you know what to expect, it's much easier to strategize around. But I think, as with all things, one pedal stroke at a time, 1 foot at a time, 1 rep at a time, whatever it might be. Don't think about the end. Think about the immediate thing in front of you and do that over and over again. And then, oh, I've arrived at the end. Brilliant. How did that happen? Because thinking about the end goal can make the process of getting there seem overwhelming, and that can allow us as human beings to do what we do best, which is catastrophize and make things worse for ourselves. Question number 4 from Toby Emmett. What are your 3 dream guests to have on the podcast within the next 3 years? So, number 1, probably Alex Hormozy, just because I think his communication skills are world-class. The way he delivers information is phenomenal, and he's obviously very financially literate. He's obviously very commercially literate, and from a content creation, from a galvanizing interest point of view, he's fantastic. So he really would be somebody I'd love to have on. Secondly, the Stoltmans, who are coming on, which is fantastic news. I'd love to have them both. I'd love to have them both in a specific setting, on which I will illuminate you all very soon in more detail. But I think they're just the most genuine, down-to-earth, lovely guys. I love everything they stand for. Having spent some time with them recently, I'm really excited to unpack their story as a family, as individuals, as athletes, as businessmen, and everything in between in the near future, wherever that might be, probably September, October time. So it's exciting to know that I've kind of put them as one, even though they are 2 people, so that's a bit of a cop-out, I will admit. But nonetheless, I've got one more. Who's it going to be? I reckon Jordan Peterson, because whilst he's quite divisive and some people form a narrow-minded opinion of something that he has said this one time, I think his intelligence and communication skills and ability to make complex information more simple is something I'd love to have a discussion with him on, to pry into his area of expertise when it comes to psychology in men, psychology and sort of behavioral sciences and things like that. Because from a personal perspective, I would love to better understand that space, and he is somebody that would be very good at doing so. And we don't need to get political. We don't need to go down the rabbit holes that clout-chasing, sort of clickbaity podcasts might do. That's not kind of the way I'd approach it. I'd approach every conversation as I do with everyone else, which is from a sort of selfish curiosity point of view, and hope that other people listen. So I'd say, as it stands, those are the 3. There's obviously a long list of other people, but narrowing it down to those 3 groups rather than necessarily individuals is the best answer I can give for you today. Question number 5, I believe. I might stop naming these because I might end up doubling down, but we'll see. Everyday Athletic question from, what were some of the key things that enabled you to start your own business? So, an innate drive that's always been with me, that means that I've always been confident it was something I wanted to do, for one. I don't know whether that's something I was born with, whether it's something that has been drilled into me from watching my dad's career develop over the years, whatever it has been, I don't know. So whether I'm sort of fortunate to have that, or whether that's something that's been trained, I don't know for certain, but it's there. And whenever I was in the working world, it was always something that I was considering, thinking on in the background. That's not to say that I was sort of coasting and not learning the lessons in that space that I needed to learn, but there did become a point where I felt confident that there wasn't much more in that stage of my life anyway that I would learn by being in a full-time role. So that was when I started actually thinking practically about, right, what needs to happen between now and point X for me to make this jump. And I'm not encouraging massively high-risk behavior, but what I am encouraging is practical solutions to the problem of maybe not being happy in the job that you're in. So it was a case of looking at what is the P&L, my personal individual P&L month to month that I need to hit as a baseline to be able to do this. And then looking at the pragmatic reality behind that in terms of, right, what am I earning now? How much time is being invested into that? If I had more of that time, could I be earning more elsewhere, etc.? And then learning to build things alongside the full-time role, seeing that slowly scale with limited time, and then becoming confident in the fact that if there was more time on the table, there could be more money on the table, which would bring this sort of balance of that individual P&L on a month-to-month basis closer to where it needed to be. And I hit a point in about December 2020 where I felt like that was in the right place. So I knew I needed to be earning X per month to sort of pay the bills and sort of not really be stressed month to month. And that's when I sort of initiated my 3-month notice to move towards getting the time back from a full-time role that I had become confident in becoming income generating once I had it back, if that makes sense. So I'm not advocating, if you want to start your own business, leave your job tomorrow. I'm advocating explore, try things out with your full-time role to the point where you have enough confidence in your abilities and the iterations you've been through to have a runway to a point where you can be confident in what happens next. And that might sound a bit dull. That might not sound as sort of wild and risky as some short-form content online might say. But for me, it was a very calculated risk, but it was one that was confident as well. And I think the real important thing is to have faith in the fact that if you can generate an income that's been building in the background alongside a full-time role in the evenings, on the weekends, whatever it might be, then you've already crossed a bridge that a lot of people haven't, which means that logic says when you have the time, mental capacity, availability, and freedom back from no longer being in a full-time role, that should translate to scaling of the stuff that you've already been doing in those limited conditions, if that makes sense. Other than that, I wouldn't advocate anyone gets into entrepreneurship or business for the sake of those things. I think the idea and the passion needs to lead. I know there's people out there that are just very money driven and would do anything for money. I don't think I'm like that. I don't think you could. I think some things I wouldn't do just because it paid really well, because it would not be fulfilling for me. And I think the currency of fulfillment in the long term is more valuable than the currency of pounds, dollars, euros, whatever it might be. So hopefully that answers the question. Not succinct and sort of punchy in terms of here are the 3 things, but that is a real consideration that was front of mind in terms of how I approach things, and I haven't looked back since. There hasn't really been any self-doubt since. I'm now in a position where even if everything that I do on a day-to-day basis fell apart, I'm confident that with the skills I've developed simply by taking the jump and learning as I go, I'd be able to figure out something as an alternative by having the freedom and the time and the skills available that have come from no longer being in a full-time position, if that makes sense. Question from Atlas Edge, number 6, I believe. How do you reframe your mindset on the tough days to get after it? All comes down to, I'm not going to get in a discipline v motivation point of view here, but the question is why? Why do you do the things that you do? Why do you have the goals that you have? And how can you make that so front of mind, your North Star, that when you wake up in the morning and you're feeling a bit groggy, you're feeling a bit lackluster, you're feeling like you're struggling a bit, it's no longer an option to crawl back into bed or sort of take the easy route? Because if you're a driven person, ambitious person, I'd like to think there is a reason why out there that's big enough for you to win over yourself whenever the going gets tough. And that's the day-to-day stuff. That's sort of laying the foundations and structuring your lifestyle and your existence to give you the best opportunity and the best chance at getting out of bed with a spring in your step to go and focus on the things that you're passionate about. That's where eating well, training hard, having a good circadian rhythm, making sure that you're getting enough micronutrition, making sure you're hydrated, making sure you're not drinking all day, every day. All these things underpin the foundations of you giving yourself the best chance to engage with your passions on a day-to-day basis. But there are going to be some days where taking your foot off the gas is wise. You might have had a chaotic couple of weeks where your sleeping pattern's all off, you've not been able to train, you've not seen any of your loved ones, things have been chaotic, and you might wake up one morning and think, you know what, I think today's the day that I just calm down a little bit. And that's not a bad thing. That's not you chickening out. But the more that you can build those times and slots into your diary as a prevention, not a cure, the more that you can be really quite black and white in when you know you can put your foot down, and when you know you can take your foot off the gas, and the more that you do that, the better you'll understand how to look after your mental health on a day-to-day basis, and when is the right time to book a couple of days off and go to the Scottish Highlands, or when you should do a long run midweek just to clear your head after that big meeting that you know is going to be high stress and there's going to be a bit of a come down effect off the back of because you've been thinking about it so much. So tough days will come, but when it comes to the day-to-day, the question as to why you are doing the things that you're doing is most important to underpin that. When it comes to the days where you feel actually the sort of world's weighing heavy on your shoulders, try and build in time to reflect on those feelings into your diary on a weekly basis, but also just be realistic with yourself and ask yourself the question of, is there a deeper issue here, or am I just looking for an excuse to not do the things that I said I was going to do? And they're two very different things. Question from Callum Kidd, number 7, I believe this is. Have you ever been interested in going full gym bro and getting lean as beep? Lean as fuck, by the way. We do swear on this podcast. It's already rated as explicit, so didn't need to beep that time, but here we are. So I did this once when I was 18. I got to about 7.5% body fat. I was jacked AF, and I was looking at photos of myself on a daily basis and thinking, oh, I've got to be leaner. I'm not working hard enough, this, that, and the other. And it became very toxic, very fast. And I came out of the back end of that thinking, you know what? Bodybuilding, body composition focused training is not for me. It's not good for my head. It creates bad habits. Lesson learned, move on. And now I am performance focused. I'm only really competitive with myself. I get a huge amount of value from sort of doing my own thing, creatively coming up with my own goals and building the sort of storytelling and stuff around it. And that is very valuable for me and is kind of always the case. Any body composition goals are a byproduct. I do sometimes struggle with the fact that, yes, being really, really jacked would be great for YouTube thumbnails. Yes, if I had my top off and more Instagram posts, maybe it means that reel would have a better chance of going viral. But at the end of the day, I know what's good for me. I've learned what's good for me. As a blanket statement, I don't think the metrics and focus points of bodybuilding in general terms, aesthetically focused training in general terms, are necessarily good for one's mental health in terms of measuring our success. I think it's potentially, well, it's not inherently dangerous, but I think it gives a higher risk to those that are susceptible to it to be sucked into the unhealthy side of training. I think the discipline that's sort of popular in the space that I operate in that gives the highest chance of individuals having a negative relationship with their training discipline is bodybuilding / aesthetically driven training. So that's not to say it's bad. That's not to say that I think everybody that is a bodybuilder or aesthetically focused has an unhealthy relationship with training, but more that I think if you are the sort of person that can go down a slippery slope with these sort of things, or ever feels that they're dependent on training or attached to their self-worth to it, or feels the need to compare themselves to other people online, I personally believe the performance-oriented goals make it much, much easier to stay away from that trap than aesthetically focused goals do, which is why I've sort of tried it once. I've been lean in the past. I've been lean since I was really jacked years ago. I'll probably be lean again, but that's as a result of my training focus, not because I've decided, you know what, bro, I'm going to look sick at Ocean Beach for the 1 week that, I don't know, I've never been to Ocean Beach, but if I did, there's no part of me that's going to do a mad cut to get there for the 1 week for aesthetic purposes, if that makes sense. So essentially, Callum, been there, done that, learnt the lessons needed, occasionally get an urge to be like, oh yeah, let's just get full on jacked and tan, but then I kind of think about everything that goes with that and think, you know what, I'd rather just focus on performance and enjoy everything that surrounds that. Question from Russell C. Williams, number 8, I believe this is. To double or not to double? Winky face. I believe this is obviously in reference to the brutal, and if, Russell, you are asking whether you should do the single or the double, both are hard. The double is harder, but was exceptionally rewarding for me. The event itself is not what concerns me, though. It's the process of training for it that concerns me. And that is where I really, really struggled last year. So I don't know your context, so I'm not just going to do the sign up and figure out as you go, because I know personally how difficult it was for me to get to the start line. So look at the context. If the double is something that you feel you can feasibly manage, obviously it's going to be very, very tough, but it's not going to cause a divorce and you to lose custody of your kids and to financially ruin yourself, etc., etc. then definitely something worth considering. But the single is a fantastic achievement in and of itself, obviously. It was rated the hardest triathlon in the world one year. So the need to double it is not necessarily there, but there is the option to double it. And having done that myself, it was exceptionally rewarding. It was exceptionally difficult. And actually, there's been long-term ramifications for me, as we'll move on to the next question quite neatly here in a second. But Russell, I'd suggest the double if you can feasibly make it work. Context is king, as with all of these questions. So, next question from David_Graham. Are you still doing the Norseman? ? No. Unfortunately, I'm not. And it's on the same weekend that I'm doing the Donaldini Games. And that is because the double took an awful lot out of me getting to the start line. And the long-term sort of post-event blues come down that came from that was quite severe, where my desire to get in the pool, my desire to be out on the bike was really worn down until about March of this year. And I spent January, February, March, even some of April, really punishing myself psychologically for not waking up excited about triathlon training. Being very privileged to have a place on the Norseman, being very privileged to have the opportunity to do a bucket list race. But I was in this cycle of anger with myself for not being excited about the training for it. That's not a position I'd been in since I sort of started doing this stuff at the level that I do. And it was damaging me personally. It was getting in the way of other things. I was putting training off and therefore just losing time to sort of not wanting to do the training, but I'm not the sort of person that skips training. So I'd then just lose time not doing what I was going to do anyway, and therefore eating into my sleep, eating into work time, eating into dinner time, eating into time I could spend with Erin. And I had some partnerships change this year. We had some team members change within the businesses, which means that there's a whole load of contextual change from last year when I accepted the place on the Norseman that I hadn't considered going into this year. And that context ultimately means that the process of training for and documenting and working towards the Norseman in August this year, very difficult decision to make, but it just didn't feel like the right time. There are some massive things going on with the businesses at the moment, which will soon become clear. One in particular, which is exceptionally exciting, but there's been a lot of growth. We've just hit over 1,700 athletes with Omnia, which is just remarkable. I was in Australia and America for the first couple of months of the year, didn't have access to a bike, didn't have access to pools very regularly, all these sort of things that were all part of the process. The brand that was due to be funding most of the project in terms of documentation, I'm no longer with, which meant that we looked at funding it ourselves. But given that the team has changed, given that there was travel and accommodation for quite a wide production team at this point, the cost that was involved with it meant that we felt that was better allocated elsewhere. And all of this pains me to say because I am absolutely cosmically drawn to that race, and I know the weekend it's on, I'll probably struggle and punish myself a little bit for sort of not deciding to do it, and there'll be a part of me that thinks that I just shied away from it, but I know that to not be the case because I can see everything that's happened in the period of which I would have needed to be training towards it that has moved the businesses forward, has moved our community forward, has moved the future forward, has actually allowed us to become bigger and better in a way that means that when I do eventually get to go and do the Norseman, the video will be phenomenal, the performance will be phenomenal, it'll be really rewarding for me individually. The financial considerations of it won't be a burden to bear, it won't be getting in the way of other business priorities, it won't be getting in the way of my sort of personal life. And to be quite honest, not focusing on triathlon for the sort of spring and summer thus far has been really great for me personally because it means I've been able to be more flexible up and down to London over Europe. I've been able to do more things with Erin at weekends because it means I don't need to hold off saying yes to this, yes to that, because I've got a 6-hour bike ride on my very specific bike the following day. Running, I can take a pair of shoes and just crack on. Gym work, I can sort of make work whatever city I'm in. And that in itself, for me personally, as a human being and as a sort of content creator, business owner, has been fantastic. So that's kind of the context, really. I don't want any of that to sound like excuses because it's not. We just had to look at things very practically speaking, and it hurts me. I don't like. I've avoided this conversation because I haven't really known how to phrase it without sounding. I've kind of wanted to try and please everyone on this. I know there'll be some people in the triathlon community that will think, oh, he's taken a place that could have gone elsewhere. And yeah, there's validity in that, I guess. But I could have got injured. I could have missed my flight. My bike could have not arrived. There's a whole load of things that could have happened that mean that place wasn't used. They were non-transferable anyway, so I'm trying not to really put too much pressure on myself with that. But the bottom line is, the triathlon focus of last year, 28 hours of training a week alongside scaling the businesses for the double, took a lot from me. It was unhealthy. I learned my lesson from that. I spent too long punishing myself rather than listening to what I was truly attracted to at the time, January, February, March, April of this year. And actually, I found the process of lifting heavy and running recently far more freeing, far more enjoyable, and far more easy to work into my day-to-day schedule, alongside some very big business considerations and projects and things that are upcoming that effectively mean that within the context of the year, within the context of the budgets required, within the context of the travel and the team and everything that goes into this, rather than just being a recreational race that I attend, no, I'm not doing the Norseman this year. And I really hope that gives enough context for people to understand my point of view, because I've been kind of afraid of sharing this in that detail, to the point where I've actually probably left a few conversations a bit too late with some people, for which I apologise. So yeah, I think this is the first situation I've been in the past couple of years where I really felt like there was a difficult decision to make, where whatever I did, I wouldn't be totally confident in my decision. I do back what I've chosen to do, but there's still a part of me that wishes I could have made it work, or wishes there was a world in which it could have worked. So that was a long, long section, but I hope that gives context to those that were interested. And I hope it gives a bit more of an insight into, in some ways unfortunate, but in some ways uniquely, the way I need to view these events and these races within the context of everything going on, because the sort of commercial element of this is probably the stuff that isn't so openly spoken about, and the money, the time, the travel commitments, and the inflexibility that would have come with training for the Norseman effectively got in the way of the business strategy and the business priorities that we needed to focus on, and the allocation of all those resources, myself included, training time, all those things. It was a misaligned use of resources, is how I'll really keep it simple. So there we go. Christ, that answer's over. That was a very, very long segment, and circles back to Russell's question, to double or not to double. Focus on your reason why. Think about why you're doing it, and make sure to be able to make it work within the context of your life, because I managed to make the double work within the context of mine, but there have been long-lasting considerations to bear in mind. So there you are. Question from the WAF 16. How do you manage to recover from day-to-day training? I don't do anything wacky and wild. I do the right amount of training. I've got Johnny programming for me. Omnia Performance is our business that focuses on getting people doing the right amount of training rather than just doing training all the time, which can lead to an inability to recover. Essentially, make your recovery protocol inbuilt into the training program that you're doing in the first place, whereby you're never overspilling what you can recover from, and therefore being burnt out all the time. Sleep, hydrate, eat well, and every once in a while there might be a sports massage, there might be a day off, there might be a wild high calorie intake day, but I'm not sitting in MyoMaster air boots and sitting in ice baths and saunas every night. I'm not doing that stuff. There's probably a time in my life where I'll get to that point, whether it's just for enjoyment and the sort of novelty of it, I don't know. But such marginal considerations are given far too much consideration by 99% of people within this space, when in reality their programming and lifestyle choices need to be looked at with more detail before the grain of sand at the top of the pile of sand needs to be considered. Question from Harry Ayres McGonigal. Do you use a Garmin and a Whoop? Yes, I do. They're different things. And a lot of people are sort of surprised by this. A Garmin is an activity tracker. I put it on to track my activities. And a Whoop is a lifestyle tracker. Yes, Garmin has elements of the lifestyle tracking inbuilt into it, but I don't like wearing my Garmin all the time, which means that as soon as you start taking it off regularly, it loses the main selling point of Whoop, which is you never need to take it off ever, and therefore you get total visibility over your lifestyle data. So my Whoop is on my right wrist at all times. My Garmin will go on for my running, swimming. I use my bike computer for my bike rides. I don't track gym workouts with my Garmin on, and I will be wearing a Swiss watch most of the time day to day at work, as whenever I put a Swiss watch on, I am about to do my work. That's sort of my uniform, my ceremony, as it were. and I have made that work for me. But if you don't want to spend out on 2 devices, then look into what features you're looking for from what devices and have a go from there. If you are looking to try Whoop, then you can get your first month free with a link in the description down below, and it's something that I do highly recommend, and I've got some videos on YouTube on as well. But it is a lifestyle tracker, and at the end of the day, Whoop is not going to change your lifestyle for you. It is only going to give you the information for which you to then act upon, and if you don't act upon it, nothing will change. So let that be a lesson to you all, as I've had DMs and messages in the past saying, oh, Whoop's this amount a month and nothing's changed. It's like, well, that's up to you, my friend. So Garmin has body battery. It's got some things to consider, but my relationship with Garmin means that it doesn't work for me. So have a look at the devices, have a look at their features, but do not view them in the same light because they are not the same thing. Question from Ryan Shenton. Thoughts on Hyrox? I think it's a fantastic, accessible event for those that are interested in fitness. I don't like the fact that everybody seems to do it with their top off, therefore blurring the boundaries between do you need to be really jacked or do you just need to be able to perform at a high level in this sport. There are some silly arguments happening online about how to categorize Hyrox and what that means for other definitions of hybrid training that I just think are ridiculous and are doing nobody any favors except the egos of those that are trying to start the arguments. And essentially, I think it's a great sport in and of itself for those that are interested in that sort of thing. I'm not really that drawn to competitive environments like that anymore. I don't feel the need to prove myself against other people. That's not why I train. That's not why I do things. It's not why I put things on the internet. And I will probably do one at some point, but I will do one when I get excited about it. When I wake up in the morning and think, yeah, you know what, I'm really keen to give Hyrox a bash. For the time being, I've got a lot of people in my ear saying, oh, you should do one, you'd be really good, etc., etc. And whilst I probably feel I'd be quite confident from the off, and there's a lot of things I can translate well to it, especially off the back of the 500-pound deadlift and sub 5 mile, well, 500-pound deadlift and mile under 5. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the thing I want to do at the moment. And taking a lesson from the Norseman prep that I've already ran through in some detail, I spent the first 3 months of the year punishing myself for feeling that I should be training for something that I wasn't waking up in the morning excited for. So a big lesson for me is don't do that again. And the beauty of training the way that I do means that I can bounce from one thing to the next. Last year was massively ultra endurance focused. This year is much more speed and weight focused. Next year is probably going to be somewhere in the middle. And that's great. I'm having fun. And I hope that other people that follow along for the journey are too. So Hyrox is fantastic. There's some things about it that I don't love as much as other people love, perhaps. And I think from a commercial point of view, I fear that the functional fitness community that have taken to it like sort of ducks to water might not necessarily have the longevity that they might currently think they do, because the trends in that community that we've seen with Omnia and just generally speaking, the sort of ethos that runs through it is the randomization and variety that goes with it doesn't necessarily speak to the same thing over and over again that Hyrox is. So I hope I'm wrong for the sake of the continued growth of the sport, given it's so accessible, and CrossFit at the other end is sort of much less accessible with the economics of it, the way that boxes work, the fact that Olympic lifting, gymnastics, top end strength, speed, all these things that you need to train concurrently is a big, big commitment. And a lot of the movements are very complex, which means it's not accessible to the average day-to-day person that trains and isn't as easy to put on in the setting that Hyrox is. So I think it's a fantastic middle ground, but I do think the arguments that are now surrounding it from a hybrid training, what is hybrid, what's a hybrid athlete, this is a hybrid race, bullshit is just a waste of everybody's time, other than for those that want to stroke their own egos online. As just quickly on that, the only person that has any right to gatekeep the term hybrid athlete is Alex Viada, as he created it in 2015 in his book called The Hybrid Athlete. So, to the handful of Americans that are trying to claim some sort of ownership or definition of the term, unfortunately that ship sailed years before you even knew it existed, is all I'll sort of throw my hat in on the silly argument that goes with that. Because essentially, my ethos and view on these things is hybrid training should all be about people enjoying training with intent towards a variety of disciplines and giving the middle finger to anyone else that's telling them that that's not the way they should be doing things, or actually that doesn't fit within this box and therefore it's wrong. And unfortunately, there are now camps forming within the phrase, the definition, that are trying to do the same thing, which I just think is of no use to anyone, when my favourite thing about this is self-development and seeing development in others. So does that really answer your question? I think it does. I think I added a few other things there. But I think the bottom line is I think Hyrox is fantastic as it's very accessible. I think there are a few cultural things that aren't coming from Hyrox themselves that are putting me off it a little bit. So when I wake up one morning and think, yeah, I'm really keen on going at Hyrox, I will go at Hyrox. Until then, people are going to keep DMing me asking, am I going to do one? You should do one. And the YouTube comments on every video are testament to this. So again, a very long answer to a very short question, but hopefully that clears things up. Question from Hindmarsh95. You going to do a social 10K in Edinburgh sometime? Yes, we are going to do lots of them. There will be more information on this coming very, very soon. Question from Rich Paul Hill. Is a 405 squat and sub 24K still good for a newbie hybrid? Asking for a friend. Progress is good for a newbie hybrid. Progress is good for everyone. This is what I mean. There are no standards or metrics or anything that you need to hold yourself accountable to other than yourself, in my opinion. And I think a 405 squat and a sub 24K is a fantastic thing to aim for if your squat's currently at 350 and your 4K times 22 minutes. Progress is progress. Train for progress unless you're a professional athlete and you are training for your paycheck or you are training to win events, in which case the context is different. But in my mind, self-development is why 99.9% of us train on this planet. So let's focus on beating ourselves on a day-to-day basis, not focusing on the challenges that I've done or what other people have done unless it's something that you want to work towards within those parameters, but focusing on how can we be better every day. That's kind of the way I view things. So Rich, best of luck with your training. I think that's a fantastic goal to aim for. Question from Farnan Patrick. Do you think there is a massive hybrid advantage being strength then cardio versus cardio then strength? Right. This is something that isn't spoken about online enough. The answer is yes, 100%. I would not be nearly as competent in this space had I not had a massive strength bias beforehand. There are other people in the space that come from a similar background, and having the strength, capacity, and muscle tissue from beforehand gives you a huge advantage, plain and simple. Coming from being a professional triathlete to a powerlifter, for example, would be very difficult in comparison because you're sort of working from the bottom up rather than the top down in terms of what you're trying to maintain when it comes to the sort of neurological adaptations that you're looking for. Nick Symmonds, Ryan Hall, two great examples. They've both gone from being Olympian level runners to strength dominant, and in the process have lost a lot of their running ability. I think Nick Symmonds, in the process of getting up to a 500-pound deadlift, has lost the ability to run a sub 5-minute mile, and he has run a sub 4-minute mile in the past. Ryan Hall still holds the American record for the marathon and currently weighs about 215 pounds and can deadlift 230 odd kilos, and I don't think can run a sub 5-minute mile anymore. And that just goes to show that whilst these two athletes have made phenomenal strength gains and are still absolute savages in their own right, the starting point they had in terms of the running ability that they've had to compromise on to build the strength is massively inverse to the journey that I've been on and that others have been on, and we've seen with our athletes at Omnia. So therefore I do think there is a massive bias to coming from a strength/gym background and then building the aerobic capacity from there, which is something to consider. That's not to say that if you're listening to this as a relative beginner in both, that you should do a big old bulk and get swole and strong to then develop. You can sort of build concurrently, but I'll hold my hand up and say that genetically I have a fantastic ability to adapt. So does my brother. And yeah, I'm in a great advantage within this space because I come from a strength background. So whether that helps or hinders you, I don't know, but hopefully that clears things up. Question from Eurobukchaj. Don't know what name that's trying to be. And I don't think that's a language that I'm just struggling to pronounce. I think that's just a collection of letters or even a randomly generated Instagram username. How do you train when your depression makes it hard to leave your bed? So when I was suffering with depression, 2014, 2016, there were periods where getting out of bed was near impossible. But the only thing I had on a day-to-day basis that I looked forward to and really anchored me down was, in fact, my training. So as always, I'm not a health professional. I'm not necessarily the best person to ask on this. But from my experience, getting to the gym was what got me out of bed, full stop. Doesn't mean that all sessions were great, doesn't mean that all numbers were hit, doesn't mean that it was always productive, doesn't mean it was always rewarding, but it was the one constant I had in my life that was actually getting me out of bed, even on the days when it was really difficult to do so. So again, it sort of circles back to that question of why. What is the sort of North Star reason why you're training? If you can really refine that and really focus on that and get that right, then it probably means that you'll have a better fighting chance of getting out of bed and getting to the gym, getting to the training session when you're really, really struggling. And if you are currently struggling, then I wish you all the best and hope that the resources that are available to you, whether from a personal point of view or whether it's a sort of hotline, things that are available online. There's lots of support out there. I know it's difficult to feel alone in that space, but hopefully you can find some solace in the training that you do have, the people around you, the gym environment, whatever it might be. But I really do encourage you to find support around you to just have positive conversations, not to mollycoddle your way back to feeling yourself, but to effectively free you up to figure out what is the best next steps for you. Because one positive step forwards is all it takes to sort of start that momentum to get better. And I think a lot of that can come from having open, honest conversations with those around us, especially man to man, because it can be a real weight lifted off our shoulders. So I don't necessarily have enough experience to really answer your question with any more detail than I have, but hopefully that helps in some ways. Question from Max_hybrid, 800 meter PR. I think it is 2:11. And that was done in 2020 with my brother in a 4x800 meter session. And I went out way too hard on the first one and suffered very hard on the remaining 3. Question from Mike Cookson, 84. Thoughts on testosterone popularity? I've been asked this question before, and my answer is the same as it was previously. I have no thoughts whatsoever. I know nothing about it. I believe it's some sort of natural I think it's just a modern day pro-hormone sort of thing, which sounds dodgy. Is it a natural? I don't know. I know nothing about it other than I've seen it in ads and threads online. But yeah, that sort of world I know nothing about. Is it something that Huberman's spoken about? Maybe. But I don't know much about it, and that's with somebody that has their finger on the pulse with the things that I feel is relevant to the people we look after with Omnia. And I know nothing about it. So maybe that's telling in and of itself. Maybe that's an exceptionally arrogant statement to say. I don't know. Read into that what you will. But I have never felt the need to look into it. And I've never felt the need to explore it for the sake of the focus points at my end or those that we look after from an athlete point of view. So, sorry, Mike. I have none. Question from T_D_Pollard. Of the things you've achieved so far, what's been the one you're most proud of? Raising £100,000 for Movember, because I know that in the process of doing so, we galvanised a lot of people to help us with that fundraising. It wasn't me that raised that £100,000. I was sort of the vessel for the projects, and the projects were what helped do it. And those projects were underpinned by hundreds of people all over the place. So having those positive conversations, seeing effectively the intention of the fundraising for Movember be actioned in the process of raising the fundraising for Movember was great. And actually, for any work that I'll do with the organisation moving forwards, that will be the aim. It won't be the actual sort of money raised. It'll be how much of a community impact, how much of a tangible, positive impact can we have, rather than just raising money to sort of then be spent on having a tangible, positive impact from a community point of view. So the lessons I've learned, the skills I've developed, the people I've met, the conversations I've had, the things that benefited me personally, the things that I know have benefited others in the process of raising £100,000 for Movember is something I'm very proud of, but also became unsustainable in terms of the way that we were going about it from a project point of view. That's not to say that there isn't something big brewing, but yeah, I look back on 2018, 2019, 2020, the big projects from Movember very, very fondly. Question from Alex Bishop Adventure. How come you don't work with Gymshark anymore, mate? ? Effectively, the direction the business was going in, that is sort of quite obviously available online for you all to see, didn't feel like something I aligned with long term anymore. There were a few sort of points of friction that were taking more than they were giving within the overall equation of the relationship, and it got to a point in March when contracts were up for renewal when it just didn't feel like the right way to continue. So that is that, effectively. I have fond memories with a lot of people within the business over the years, and obviously they've been very supportive of a lot of the things that I've done, and there's some videos online that my name is still attached to with them, so you can go and engage with those. But yeah, as of March 2023, I have no longer been with Gymshark, and I wish them all the best in their continued growth, but it is in a very different space to the one that I joined as an athlete with in 2021. So as with the growth of all businesses of any size, myself as an individual, we hit a point where the alignment was no longer there, and here we are. So that's that. Question from Tommy Reed Coach. How did you go about organising funding for your bigger, more costly events? Essentially, being ruthlessly annoying in people's DMs and emails and trying to find any small point of value for those that would be able to provide funding, and learning over the years what was actually interesting and usable from a budget point of view. Because it's not just a case of providing value to the partners, it's essentially selling them on the mission of the project, finding a way that they can get involved that isn't just giving you money to help do things. That's not going to go very far unless it's a really small sum. But if there is a brand that you want to go after for your big project, you need to find a way to integrate that brand into the project. You need to find a way to involve their community. You need to find a way to reach the right person in the marketing department that can say yes to the budget, etc., etc. And that is all just doing the reps. I don't have a cheat code. I don't have a hack. That was just ruthless badgering in people's DMs and sort of exploiting networks to try and find the right person and taking no as an answer over and over and over again to learn from those no's to then figure out how to turn it into a yes. And yeah, some of the events were very, very costly. I think the personal cost for raising £100,000 over the years to me was about 14 grand. So that was something I was more than willing to part with, and it was a huge personal learning curve and investment for me in many ways, I guess. But yeah, effectively I had to stomach the costs along the way a little bit to make the projects happen because I hadn't yet learned the lessons on how to reach the right people. But I only learned how to reach the right people by continuing to do the projects and sort of figuring things out as I go. So how did you go about organising funding for your bigger, more costly events? Don't be afraid of rejection. Be an absolute badger. Believe in the mission. Believe in the cause. Come up with a unique and exciting proposition and be absolutely hell-bent on bringing it to life, because that will stand out in a sea of I'm running a marathon for this. Would you like to give me 150 quid? Versus, here's a personal story. This is why this is important to me. This is how I'm galvanizing my local community. This is what I want to achieve. This is how it can benefit you. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what I expect it to return. This is how the money that's raised for charity is going to actually help people. And here's how I can see it integrating between the pair of us. That's very, very different. Question from J Franco 20. How did you and Erin meet? So I was working at a bar in Edinburgh, and she came in with a friend of hers who I saw last week, actually, for the first time in quite a while, who knew who I was from friends of hers at university, and therefore they tried to leverage me for free drinks. In the process of trying to leverage me for free drinks, I found the whole conversation quite entertaining. Didn't give them any free drinks, and cynically decided to forget to put alcohol in their drinks, because I think the story I'll go with is that I was so besotted with Erin from the moment I met her that I was just lost in the moment and forgot what I was doing. But I was actually just pretty ruthlessly hungover from the night before, and I think just by having a conversation with two strangers, forgot what I was doing. But nonetheless, the hilarity of me forgetting to put alcohol in the drinks continued into the evening, and that meant that there was a follow-up conversation as they came over and said, bruv, where's the booze in the drink that we've paid full price for here? And I thought, my apologies. And from that point, we saw each other around Edinburgh a few times, and then, ended up connecting more formally from that point onwards. And we are now engaged to be married and have a great day-to-day together. So let the lesson of that be, don't be ruthlessly hungover the night before working a shift at a bar, or maybe do. I'm unsure. But either way, it makes me laugh that an attempt was made, and it actually went the exact opposite way that Erin and her friend intended it to go, because they wanted free drinks. Instead, they paid full price for just some soda water with some lime cordial in it. So, win some, lose some. Question from Adam Remain. How small did you feel next to Tom and Luke? I honestly cannot put into words how unfathomably large they are. Luke is big. Luke is stupidly big. Luke makes rugby players look pathetic. And then Tom gets out of the car. Just different gravy, son. And there were some angles where I kind of got used to it, like sitting across from a table or something, or sitting in a car, and then I saw Tom open a car door or go through a door frame, and it just suddenly becomes just mind-blowing again. Just the size upwards and width ways was just wild. And there's a few photos of the three of us together which I just can't stop laughing at, because even like there's a wide angle lens effect happening, but good grief. I've never felt smaller, I've never felt weaker, and I have so much respect for that pair in terms of the way they go about things. And it's just unfathomable to me to know that people that size exist, let alone I'm connected to and have spent time with, because they almost seem mythical. So very small, Adam. Microscopic, in fact. Yeah. It's not often I feel really, really, really weak in any room, but I felt really, really, really weak in a room with Rongo, Tom, and Luke very recently. Question from Ialana Buckby. When did you first consider yourself a hybrid athlete? In about 2018, because Johnny, my coach since 2018, who prepped me for my first charity event, which was essentially how I got involved in this space, was part of the sort of researching process for Alex's book, The Hybrid Athlete, and was a part of sort of Alex's coaching business for many years. So the phrase was coined with him. I'd heard of that term before I sort of got into it, and I started doing a lot of Zone 2 stuff. But because I was training for a specific event and all of my training was with the intention of being good at that event, I didn't necessarily consider myself a hybrid athlete as I was training for one individual thing. But then going into 2019, when I was training for an Ironman alongside sort of powerlifting top end strength, that was when the training discipline suddenly became concurrent. And Johnny and I saw that as my transition, as it were, into being a hybrid athlete. And I use it in a YouTube thumbnail for the first time in early 2020, I believe, and sort of ever since then, that's kind of been a thing that we focused on. And as of recently, it has blown up online quite aggressively, has become a very confusing term, has become a very divisive term, and has got a little bit out of control in many ways. But as I said earlier, let people enjoy things, and that's really all that matters in my world. So, yeah. Question from Christy Cohen. Would you ever consider veganism? For ethical reasons, yes. For the ecological reasons that are considered, no, because I actually think arguments on both sides fall flat on their face in many ways when there's arguments presented from the other sides in terms of the actual research, and it all comes down to making sensible choices, not veganism is inherently better than not being a vegan, in the same way that eating meat is not inherently better than being a vegan, because meat eaters like to use the avocado importation statistics, and vegans like to use the highly processed meat that goes into McDonald's consumption in the US statistics, when in reality, it doesn't need to be as black and white in that. There's far more nuance to consider, and from a performance point of view, from a health point of view, from a sustainability point of view, a lot of the research isn't as conclusive, or it hasn't been presented to me in a way that is near enough conclusive enough for me to feel, right, this is the case, to genuinely consider it. But from a ethical point of view, yeah, I love animals. I don't like the thought of animal suffering. There's probably an element of willing ignorance a lot of the time, but that's just sort of the way the world's come to exist, and the sort of survival of the fittest exists in many ways. So it's not a new concept. We're not the sort of species that has made that the case. So from an ethical point of view, I think that the sort of moral approach to things is very admirable, and those that take that stance, I enormously respect. It's something occasionally I sort of consider in a way, but not yet enough, to be honest, from a lifestyle point of view, to be something that I would actually make the switch over to. I know there's some people that have had massive results in terms of their IBS or the way that they feel on a day-to-day basis, and that's absolutely fantastic. Essentially, the bottom line, as with all things, look at the information that's available out there, dissect it for yourself. Don't take things as maxims or verbatim online. Look at things, read between the lines, form your own opinions, and then decide what works best for you within the context of your own lifestyle. And I know there might be some rebuttals saying, oh, well, it's not as simple as that because the whole world's at stake. But I say again, research and arguments have been framed in a way online that has been making this very, very divisive, and I'm not going to get into this anymore because of the inherent division and politics that becomes associated with any opinions on this space. But my opinion is firmly, look at the information that's available to you, go into the depth that's required to actually be able to understand the opinion that you would like to form your opinion, and then act accordingly based on that. But most importantly, throughout this whole thing, have an open mind to discussions with other people on the subject matter, because I am more than willing to have my mind changed on the topic in the same way that I would hope that somebody would be more than willing to sit down and have a conversation with me on it. Question from Pav B. Talcum powder for endurance and long days, yay or nay? I've never used talcum powder. I am a chamois cream evangelist, and that has always worked very well for me. I use Glide, Body Glide, or Lube by Hoob for my swimming. Other than that, I use chamois cream for running and cycling. Mark Loveday, have you ever competed in, or would you be interested in competing in, a Spartan race? Similar answer to Hyrox earlier. Yeah, as a gimmicky sort of thing in my mind. Not that I'm saying it's gimmicky, but I kind of, in my head, I put it in the category of I do it for fun, not competitively. and it wouldn't be something that I train for as an A race. That's what I mean by gimmicky, just to immediately swallow my words and make sure that I don't seem reductive of the difficulty of it or the sort of top level Spartan athletes, because they're absolute savages. But yeah, for me, it's not just something, I say again, it's not something I'd wake up for excited and therefore put a lot of my eggs in that basket of at this stage. Might be in the future, who knows? Jason Baker, ever dealt with sleep anxiety the night before a race and how to deal with it not to wreck yourself on race day? It's actually not something I've struggled with too much, but it's something that I know other people have, and I think that's where as much forward preparation and thinking as possible to give you confidence on the things that are making you anxious is very important. We have a lot of people come to us at Omnia that have sort of failed ultras in the past because they went about it without necessarily learning the things they needed to learn in training, that then sort of caught them out on events, which means that they then had fears that everything would fall apart when it came to race day the next time. So training is not just practical, training is psychological as well. And make sure if there are things that are making you anxious in your training, as soon as you feel that way, try and address them and try and build some confidence on that anxiety ahead of race day so that you are confident in the things that were previously making you anxious or have the capability to make you anxious ahead of race day. And then that way, there might be less of a melting pot of anxieties, which might give you a better chance of sleeping, which might therefore give you a better chance of performing. But it's not something I've struggled with too much myself, as with all of our training, Johnny's always set me up really, really well for the events, whereby the question I ask myself is always, have I done everything that was available to me within the context that I had to get to the start line? And if the answer is yes, the outcome doesn't matter because I'm going to do my very best once I sort of begin. But if the answer is no, which it hasn't been yet, then I'd be ashamed of myself and ask myself why that was the case and how can I rectify it moving forwards. So I think the anxiety would come if the answer had been no, I hadn't done everything that I could, because that would have made me feel accountable to myself for not having done what was required. So that's my not so hot take on that one. There you go. Question from Emil Levine. Hi Fergus, what would advice be to give someone who's about to enter university and enjoys the routine and rigors of endurance training but fears a lack of balance in everyday life? I'm aware you're battle with mental health issues and therefore would value your advice. First things first, university and training are something that can be very easily managed. I think the balance of the two is up to you to be ruthless with what's important to you and what you prioritize. The problem with university is being pulled too much into the shiny things, into what other people are doing. And there's definitely merit to that because you meet new people, you can try new things, and it's the sort of period of your life where you do that the most. But if you know what's good for you, set goals, set parameters, and factor in and schedule and plan. Have a structure, have a way of working it into your week. Look at what your contact hours and seminar considerations are going to be, and try to make your training work as effectively as possible. But don't make it the only thing that you have outside of university. Try and join some clubs. Try and make sure that you get on nights out, even if you're not drinking. I don't know what your approach might be. And don't be afraid to scale back on the training one day if you need to make room for something else, or vice versa. Because I do firmly believe, having gone to a very good university in the UK, that unless you're in probably a medicine or a law and gunning for a first, and you have a really high training volume, or you have a really busy social life, or you're a rugby player alongside it and a hockey player alongside it. Again, I don't need context per se, but I from a practical point of view, believe that it's doable. But I think the mistake most people make is being too flitty with what they focus on. So have clear goals, have a plan towards them, make sure that around that plan there is space to get drawn to the shiny things every once in a while, have a social life, focus on the right things. But as with all things, and the biggest lesson you might learn at university is priorities. And I don't want to sound like a boomer talking down to somebody that's not much younger than me at all, but the way I looked at my training through university was I had a very clear priority, which was training and competing at an international sort of stage with powerlifting, which meant that there was never any option for me to not be serious with my training, even if I was hungover, even if I had a busy day of university. So it was a late night, early morning, whatever it was, maybe even missing a lecture that wasn't necessarily as important so that I could go to the gym that afternoon, and coming up with an excuse because I knew that I could catch up on the lecture that evening when the gym was closed. There's ways around it if you have a clear goal. So that was not something I ever struggled with, but I've spoken to people that really struggled with it, and it seemed to be that it's because they were trying to do so many things all at once that effectively they were never going to be able to find the balance because there was never a balance to be found. Question from Leighton Edwards, and I think I'll probably finish on this one because it's a very good one. As someone that struggles with mental health, do you struggle to find the balance and or make sure that you don't rely on physical training as a coping mechanism for your depression as such a similar way to being an alcoholic? Very good question, and something that I've raised within the context of David Goggins on the Power Project in the past. It's definitely a consideration whereby relying on training as your coping mechanism or your escape from a life that you do not enjoy living or demons in your head that you actually need to tackle is a similar mechanism to hiding it with substance abuse or hiding it with something else or whatever it might be. It's not the same, they're not in the same category, but the sort of mechanism that we are acting upon is similar, which means that we are equally vulnerable to, if a pandemic comes along and the gyms are no longer accessible, we suddenly feel cut off, we're cold turkey, that sort of effect. I haven't been like that since I was really lean when I was 18, effectively deciding that bodybuilding metrics focused, aesthetically driven, total rigid calorie counting, refeed day Sundays sort of thing wasn't for me, freed me up to sort of look at training as purely holistic and very supportive of my day to day. And I've never been afraid to take a rest day. I embrace rest days as a positive part of the process. I won't beat myself up if I have to miss a training session because life gets in the way. But believe me, when life gets in the way, life has gotten in the way. It's not just a case of me not being asked that day. I'm very, very sort of practical about these things. But sometimes if I'm up at 4 a.m. to get a flight to London at 5 and then I get in at 7 and then I'm in meetings until 3 and then need to be on a flight at 4 and get back at 9 p.m. and need to be in the pool that closes at 9:30, then sometimes that's not going to work. But if it's a case of, I've only got 2 hours between when I finish work and that dinner with my girlfriend's parents, might be a bit rushed, you know what, I'll just not go. That's not the same thing. So that's the bit of accountability I'll hold everyone to there, but that comes with having serious training goals. But essentially, training should not be a crutch. Training should be a supportive mechanism to give you the positive emotion, affirmation, experience that frees you up psychologically to reflect on the things that you need to work on that might be making you struggle with your mental health. So Zone 2 training for me is a fantastic opportunity to reflect on the week that's been and therefore reflect on the week that's to come. And that's not me saying that if I've had a bad week, the only way I'll be able to get through it is through my Zone 2 training because it calms me down. It's like a hit of something, but rather it acts as a calibration point where it frees me up to have the problem-solving abilities to go into the following week knowing why my mental health was struggling in the previous week, rather than just thinking, I've had a bad time, let's go to the gym. Because then all you're doing is effectively, it's like a currency. If you're in need of some sort of positive affirmation or need to be sort of pulled out of a hole of negativity and you go to the gym and that's the thing that makes you feel better, then you can quickly find yourself in a place where the only way that you can make yourself feel better is the gym. Or if you don't go to the gym one day, then you immediately therefore feel bad because you haven't had that positive reinforcement mechanism. When in reality, the gym should be one part of a bigger puzzle of ways in which you support yourself with your mental health on a day-to-day basis. And that's why I disagree with a lot of Goggins' mentality, or the way that it's interpreted by people, where suffering for the sake of suffering is not what we should be focusing on, but suffering for the sake of self-reflection within the context of a balanced existence should be something we're focusing on. And that's with all of the components of hard work, discipline, taking on things that are difficult, committing to things that scare us, stuff that Goggins talks about. That's all good and stuff that I agree with, but with a thread of emotional awareness that runs through the middle of it. Otherwise, it is just suffering for the sake of suffering, and that doesn't actually do us any favours unless we are learning the lessons from it and applying it to our day-to-day lives. Because 99.9% of us aren't Navy SEALs that now jump out of planes fighting fires. So therefore, trying to exist as Goggins does, especially with the upbringing and childhood and experiences that he's had, that, again, most of us haven't, fortunately enough, means that looking at life through his frame of reference and applying that lens to our own is not necessarily the healthiest way to consider our day-to-day existence. But rather, as I said earlier with veganism, look at the information that's out there, try new things, explore what works for you, give yourself the information that is required to form an opinion so you can determine what is best for you and your lifestyle on a day-to-day basis. So I hope all of those questions that I definitely lost count of have been insightful in some way. some slightly more controversial topics in there, but as always, context is king. I'm not firmly opinionated on many things at all. But yeah, a few things that I've covered there that maybe haven't covered in previous episodes. So hopefully that's been insightful. Anything that you would like to challenge me on or discuss further, please reach out on any of the mechanisms or platforms that were offered to you to ask these questions in the first place. And as always, make sure to do all of the podcasty things. Follow, subscribe, share with a friend, check us out on YouTube, mailing list down below, check out the sponsors in the show notes, etc., etc., etc. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.